All right, let's jump right into this explainer and demystify the absolute magic, both mechanical and digital, happening inside modern motorcycle engines. I mean, if you've ever twisted a throttle and felt that instant, hard-hitting surge of power, you're literally experiencing a perfectly choreographed symphony of physics and computer science. So today we're going to break down exactly how these machines breathe, how they think, and how they generate that incredible forward motion.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at how motorcycle engines work, two-stroke versus four-stroke, the fuel delivery problem, the rise of fuel injection, and finally, adapting to the atmosphere.
Starting off with Section 1, how engines work. The piston mechanics.
You know, internal combustion is essentially taking a totally chaotic explosion and teaming it into a highly organized four-step mechanical ballet. This cycle uses that classic memorable framework: suck, squeeze, bang, blow. And with this process, notice how power is only actually made every other time the piston goes down. First, the engine breathes in the fuel and air mixture on the way down. Then, it squeezes it tight on the way up. The spark plug ignites it, there's your bang, driving the piston back down to actually turn the rear wheel. And finally, it pushes back up to blow the burned exhaust out. Honestly, it's just a brilliantly reliable design.
Moving on to Section 2, two-stroke versus four-stroke, different approaches.
Now, the two-stroke engine, this is where we see some truly ingenious simplicity. There are literally no valves in the cylinder head. Instead, it uses the piston itself as a sliding door to cover and uncover holes, or ports, in the cylinder wall. So as the piston goes up, it compresses the fuel above it, but, and here's the clever part, it simultaneously creates a vacuum below it in the crankcase, sucking in a fresh charge. When the spark ignites and forces the piston down, that downward motion pushes the exhaust out while forcing the fresh mixture in at the exact same time. It's literally doing two things at once, which means a two-stroke makes power every single time the piston goes down.
And because of these mechanics, they offer vastly different riding experiences. Four strokes, they give you highly predictable torque, strong engine braking, and they keep their oil safely contained in a bath at the bottom. But since a two-stroke uses its crankcase to move fuel and air around, the crankshaft can't just sit in an oil bath. You actually have to pre-mix oil directly into the fuel to keep things lubricated. That trade-off makes two-strokes incredibly light and crazy fast revving. We're talking mind-melting power, but they do wear out faster, they have those vulnerable expansion chamber pipes, and yeah, they produce a famously smoky exhaust.
Let's hit Section 3, the fuel delivery problem.
So for decades, motorcycles relied on carburetors to mix fuel and air. And a carburetor is strictly a mechanical analog system. When the piston moves down, it creates a vacuum. The higher atmospheric pressure outside essentially shoves fuel out of a float bowl through these tiny jets and right into the engine. It's a neat mechanical trick that worked for almost a century. But here's the catch: it's fundamentally blind. A carburetor has absolutely no idea if you're riding at sea level, freezing on top of a mountain, or anywhere in between.
41. Just let that number sink in for a second. 41 perfect air-fuel mixtures are required every single second by an EPA-compliant four-stroke engine running at just 5,000 RPM. Think about that. 41 times a second. The engine needs the absolute mathematically perfect ratio of air to gasoline.
And because carburetors were neither smart enough nor fast enough to juggle 41 perfect mixtures per second, they really struggled. They couldn't adjust to changing atmospheric conditions on the fly, which meant they frequently ran way too rich. This dumped unacceptable levels of unburned fuel straight out the exhaust pipe. As environmental regulations got stricter and stricter, the trusty old analog carburetor just hit a wall. It simply couldn't pass modern pollution standards.
Which brings us to Section 4, the rise of fuel injection. The death of the carburetor was slow, but man, it was inevitable. Early on, computer memory was expensive and honestly just physically too bulky for a motorcycle. Kawasaki boldly took the leap first in 1980 with the KZ1000. BMW and Ducati found some solid continuous success through the 80s and 90s, but for most manufacturers, carbs were just cheaper. But by 2010, the hammer came down. The law mandated that all street bikes had to be fuel injected to meet emissions. Fast forward to 2013, and even major off-road racing bikes had totally made the switch to digital fueling.
So what exactly replaced the carburetor? The ECM, or Electronic Control Module. This is the onboard supercomputer that acts as the motorcycle's brain. Remember that 5,000 RPM engine needing 41 mixtures a second? Well, modern sport bikes can redline at around 14,000 RPM. That means this ECM has to gather atmospheric data, run complex fueling calculations, and trigger a fuel injector to snap on and off in mere thousands of a second, thousands of times a minute. It is absolutely wild.
When you compare them side by side, the old vacuum system was purely mechanical, computationally dumb, and highly prone to running dirty. Electronic fuel injection, on the other hand, is incredibly smart. It shoots a hyper-precise amount of fuel directly into the intake port of each cylinder, getting you the lowest possible emissions after combustion. Honestly, EFI completely saved the internal combustion motorcycle from being regulated out of existence.
All right, our final section, Section 5, Adapting to the Atmosphere.
To inject that perfect amount of fuel, the ECM has to know the exact volume and quality of the air getting sucked into the combustion chamber. We call this air density. Using a network of tiny sensors, the ECM is constantly checking the air pressure, the temperature, the humidity, your engine speed, and exactly how far you've got that throttle twisted. It analyzes all of this instantly to figure out the exact density of the air the engine is inhaling in real time. Think about the atmosphere like a giant blanket pulling down on the Earth. Down in Florida, right at sea level, that blanket is heavy. The air is thick, meaning oxygen molecules are packed tightly together. Because there's more oxygen, the ECM reads that high pressure and commands more fuel to match it. But say you take that exact same motorcycle up to 12,000 feet in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. The air is thin. You've got lower atmospheric pressure and way fewer oxygen molecules. The ECM instantly catches this drop in density and seamlessly commands less fuel, keeping the mixture perfectly balanced without you ever having to pull out a wrench.
We've seen how internal combustion evolved from raw mechanical piston power into these highly refined digital networks just to keep these amazing machines alive and compliant. But as we wrap up this explainer, you really have to wonder, with the internal combustion engine pushed to the absolute limits of digital perfection by the ECM, where on earth do we go from here? Is the electric battery revolution the inevitable next stroke in motorcycle history? I'll leave you to ponder that one. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.